Hey everyone, welcome to another Speed Seekers podcast. Today, a returnee guest, Davin Sturdivant. Davin, you and your karting partner joined me a couple of years ago, and now you're just back on your own. So I hope you're not lonely.
No, I'm never lonely. I mean, it's great to talk to James, but it's also great to talk to you. So
Yeah. Well, I hope it's great too. So,
yeah.
hey, for listeners that don't remember that episode a couple of years ago, give listeners just a little bit of your background in the motorsport world, kind of how you got started, and then we'll jump off and we'll start talking about cars and karts and driving and sim and learning and all sorts of fun stuff.
That sounds awesome. So I race competition go-karts, and I've done that for about the last 10 years or so. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I started a community with another friend of mine, James McMahon, called Kartpulse, because we were looking for sort of a grassroots online space where new people who were entering the sport of karting could ask questions and not be totally overwhelmed. It started out as sort of this. We were thinking we were trying to do like a social media platform style thing, but as we went through that rendition, it became a little bit too complicated to manage. And so it focused down into a set of online forums because at the end of the day, a lot of the sports knowledge is transferred tribally. And so, it's who you know who's a part of a club, who you know who's been racing. And so we've been working to get people into kind of a single place and have some discussions about go-karting. So last time we came on, we talked about that and talked about go-karting. And we also talked about how it could help car racers as sort of a supplementary form of racing. Because I have a lot of folks who race cars who, I race go-karts. And I try to remind them that it doesn't have to be like this zero-sum activity where, just because you race cars means you can't race karts. And just because you race karts means you can't race cars. There's value to doing both. And just talking about kind of what those values are, all of that.
Yeah, I remember. So you and I have had these conversations a few times. I think when we first met, I mean, you were doing some indoor karting. I think maybe that's where we first met, and us just going out and having some fun indoor karting, which is still something that I highly recommend people do. And you were doing some autocross stuff as well. So you've kind of, you've. I'm not going to say you've dabbled because maybe that's not the right thing. You've tested the waters in a number of different areas of sport, and it seems like you kind of homed in on competitive karting.
Yeah, I've done autocross for a number of years before I did some competitive karting. I'm doing some sim racing now, and I have this interest in accessible motorsport. So whenever there is a type of racing that I can do that isn't just like has a crazy high barrier to entry, I'm always interested to just want to get involved. Also, too, like racing is expensive, so wherever I can afford to get the seat time, I was always going to try to. So I started in autocross and did that for a number of years, and then I wanted to do some wheel-to-wheel stuff, and I got my competition race license, but I couldn't afford a race car. And so a buddy of mine had suggested I go indoor karting, and I thought it was stupid, and then of course I got addicted to it. And then as I started racing leagues and kind of competing more frequently, then I got in touch with folks who started doing outdoor karting, and now here we are. So that kind of ended up being where I am right now, and we'll kind of see where that goes.
Well, and one of the things that we have spent a lot of time talking about, and I agree 1,000% with you, is just this whole idea that some people look at karting as, oh, well, that's something that you do on the way up, or
Right.
it's something you do as a form of training to be a better track car driver. And that is one perspective. But another perspective is it's kind of an end in itself in that it's a great place to go racing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of people are unaware that there are, classes of karting for adults. And, 25, 30, 40, like the masters, super masters, even to the international level of karting up to like the KZ shifter kart level. Part of that, I think, is karting's ability to kind of adapt to the modern era of using technology properly. But the other part of it, I think, is a little bit of the rhetoric around, what people think a go-kart is for. And, I think over the years, I've gotten a little less aggressive about, justifying it to people. And just now I'm focused more on making people aware of it. And showing them that there's a lot of racing that you can do and explaining to them what the performance threshold of a go-kart is. And there's a lot of that, and like the accessibility to even enter the sport that a lot of people aren't aware of. And so when I explain to them that here's a machine that you can buy for less than $5,000 that can do 2.5G mechanically laterally and race all day and go to a track day for less than $50, and they're like, where do I get in on this? And I show them a go-kart, then their minds open up. And they realize there's a lot more racing they could be doing, in addition to what they're already doing.
And I think there is that perception, I guess, that, oh, that's what kids do, right? Or
Hmm.
that's it's at the county fair, that
Yeah,
kind of thing. And,
yeah,
there's a place for it. But the great thing about motorsport is how accessible it is in so many different levels. But so if someone listened to this, they've been doing a lot of HPDE, they've been doing track days, they've been doing club racing, but they've never really gone out and tried karting, or even, not even tried it or anything. Where do they get started? How do they find, to me, there's a surprising number of tracks around the country, but
yes.
how do they find that?
Yeah, so one of the reasons that the Kartpulse Forums exist is to help with that. We have a track directory that points people to where all of the tracks are near you, because we jokingly say your go-kart doesn't care how far you have to travel. And for some folks, when they're entering motorsport, they don't realize that traveling is a part of the game. And then for some folks who have been racing for a while, they're like, "Oh, I only have to travel 50 miles. That's nothing," right? So we'll point people in the direction of where go-karts are. And the other reason our community is really helpful is that most folks will, raise their hand and say, "Hey, I race at this local track. You're local to me. If you want to meet on a weekend, I can help get you started." And so then that way you have a friend, you have a buddy, right? Because as with anything, there's a little bit of a learning curve. And if you can have someone who's just got a little bit more experience to kind of help guide you in the right direction, then the experience is a lot more pleasant than, "Oh, well, I bought the wrong car for the wrong class." I mean, car racers are probably equally as familiar to this, right? They bought a car, or they found a car they could afford, or they have found a car that was in a class that doesn't exist anymore, and now they're struggling because either there's no field for them, or no one knows how to work on that car, and so they're just spending money and they're not having any fun. And if no one's there to help them, then they're kind of wondering why they got into this in the first place. So, we want people to stay in the sport and have fun. And so the forums is a great place, I think, to start. There's also other series of websites you can go to, like tagusa.com and the IKF website, and National Karting Association and World Karting Association, WKA, for like a lot of US karters. And then like the CIK FAA website for international racing. There's a few other UK related ones too, like Motorsport UK, and a few other places you can go. Right. But I suggest starting at someplace at the Kartpulse Forums first, because you've got some person you can talk to and you're not guessing. Karting has a lot of classes, and there's a lot of like just understanding what things mean. And if you have a person that you can just be like, "What does this mean?" It shortcuts a lot of the guessing that, like, when I started, I didn't have. And so I just kind of spent money and figured it out, and then spent more money and figured it out. So,
Well, I'm glad you did, because then you found out for other people.
yeah.
But and one of the great things about our sport is how many people there are who are just, they love helping other people get involved with the sport. It's kind of like, I got an addiction, you should have the same addiction. Yeah.
Well, because I would talk to my friends that would be like, "Oh man, I can't believe you do this. Like, this is something I could never do." And I'm like, "That's not true. You totally could. You just need to know the steps." And, I'm also a big proponent of giving people something they can be successful at. So I'm not just going to take a brand new person and throw them in a shifter cart their first day. I mean, like, that's the equivalent of taking a new person and putting them in a formula car their very first day. Like, they would struggle like nobody's business, and they wouldn't have any fun, and they'd probably break things, and it would just be expensive. And so, you want to put them in a series or a category that they'll be successful in. It's sort of like how you do your novice races before you start doing your regional races, and then you start doing bigger races. Right? You kind of let them expand their viewpoint and experience over time. And then as they start to get more comfortable, then they'll kind of know what they want to get into, rather than, giving them a shifter cart because that's all they know, or they see something fast and they think they can do that too. And then they don't have any fun, and you never see them again. I've lost count of the number of people I see who show up with a shifter cart on the first day, and I know they won't be in the sport more than a year because it'll be too hard and they'll give up. So.
Yeah, shifter carts. Wow. I used to have one, and I wish I had it again right now, but
They're wild.
I got all sorts of excuses not having one right at the moment. But, I think, one of the things that a lot of drivers begin to understand is, if you go and drive a faster cart or car, and then you come back to your regular cart or car, everything has slowed down. It's easier. Mm-hmm. And, I would go and use my shifter cart. I'd go to the track by myself or with a buddy that we shared the cart with. And, we'd go to the track together. And, at the time I was racing prototype sports cars, pretty darn fast cars. And you had to get in the shifter cart and spend a day in that. And I get back in the prototype car and kind of like, I feel like I'm driving in rush hour traffic with one finger in the steering wheel, like la-di-da-da-da, come on. So karts can be so fast and so quick that your mind needs to be super sharp and moving super fast. And I think, so if you want to use a kart strictly as a training tool, that is one of the ways to do that. It's just to get used to that extra speed. Things happen so quickly in them.
Yeah, well, and also because of the size of kart tracks, the scale adds to that sense of speed in addition to just being low to the ground and moving fast. And so, a lot of folks, when I have that conversation with them and they race fast cars, they're like, Davin, I don't believe you. And I'm like, okay, let's go look at a go-kart track and let's go look at a big racetrack for cars, right? The length and size and width of corners for go-kart tracks are much shorter and tighter than for race cars, which are big and long and fast because you're going big and long and fast, right? So the amount of input and a direction change and other things you need to do is just going to be more and quick on a go-kart track than slow and long in a car. It just kind of is. And even if you're moving really, really fast, relatively, it's still slower than if you're in a go-kart. So if 90% of this sport, I feel like, is mental. And so a large part of it when you're driving different things is just perspective for your brain, like adding more files in the folder of just other things that you have done to give your brain a point of reference so that you feel confident when you're in the other machine that you're not going to kill yourself, pretty much. And so when you're in a go-kart and you're banging gears and throwing it in and doing all this stuff, and your brain's like, oh, I can handle a speed like this, doing this sort of thing, going this sort of speed. This is nice. And then when you move back into the slower car, you're like, okay, there's some things that don't one-to-one apply for sure, but I'm not going to kill myself. So this is good. I think we got this. And you'll start to slow down and pay more attention, and, it just serves to benefit. So there's a reason why you still see pro racing drivers, like F1 drivers, still in shifter karts, right? Like, they wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't making them better. So, I don't lean on the Formula One rhetoric for like most quote unquote normal people getting into the sport, but like there's a reason why you don't see Sebastian Vettel in the Spec Miata, if I'm being honest, right? Like there's a reason he's not in a club racer to spend his spare time. There's a reason why he's in a shifter kart to spend his spare time, and it's because it's quick. And so I always throw my hands up and say, there you go. Like, there's my example.
well, they're quick, but they're just crazy fun.
Yeah.
But the other part about them is, from a physical training perspective, 15 minutes in a shifter kart and you're practically falling out of the thing. Yeah. And, I could get in and I could drive 3 hours in a prototype car, but 15 minutes in a shifter kart was wearing me out. So super physical, great training, everything. But let's kind of go back. I don't hate to use that, but in a way, but indoor karting, which is where you and I literally bumped into each other.
Yeah, we did.
To me, and you talked about 90% of the sport being mental. So much of that mental is, how do we learn? And I think you can learn how to learn at an indoor karting facility almost as much as anywhere else, because it's the process of, well, that didn't work, I'm going to try this. Because if you just get set in your ways of, well, this is the way I always drive it, well, you're not really learning anything. But Definitely. If you kind of go through that process of, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that, and what if I did this? And so you learn how to learn, and then that can apply to whatever else you're driving, whether it's shifter karts or direct drive karts or spec Miatas or Formula One cars. It's that learning how to learn part.
Yeah, definitely. So the one thing that I tell people about racing indoor karts is because everybody and their mom drives them, all of them handle differently. Because some of them have been banged up and they're all patched together. And
what do you mean some of them?
Right? Yeah, okay, all of them. And so what you end up learning at an indoor kart track, it's like, how do I make this thing turn? How do I make this thing stop? How do I make this thing as fast as a similar car that handles and reacts differently? Because I spent 6 or 7 years racing indoor karts at like league level, and every kart was different. And so I learned really quickly how to not only recognize a problem, but also learn to adapt to what the kart wanted to do to make it go fast. And so, like, sure, maybe I wasn't going the ultimate fast speed that I could go in a kart that was set up the way that I wanted it to go, but maybe I was a tenth off or 2/10 off, right? And in a race situation, I could make that work. It's like if I could stay within the window of the guy in front of me and keep doing what I was doing, I can stay close enough that I can get by him, and then I can hold him up until the next round, and then we're good, right? And so it taught me a lot about myself, is like, how do I overcome small little challenges and learn about things? And then also, like, how do I learn against so many different people who drive at so many different levels? Like, I think we take advantage, or we take for granted, the fact that when we go to a racetrack that everyone's all trying to go the same way, and like everyone is trying to not damage their car. And when you go to an indoor track, that is not the case. Yeah. So you learn quickly of like how to spot not only bad driving, but like how do you put yourself in a situation to get by safely where you don't just pass a person and then forget about it. There's a lot of times where I used to indoor kart because I used to teach schools there too, and I tell people like you need to watch the behavior of the driver in front of you before you get there, so you know what they're going to be like once you pass them. Because there are times where you would drive by someone who just the act of driving by them would be in over their head, and they would drive right into you because they're just target fixated on this thing driving by them, and they're frustrated and they don't know what to do. And so you'd think the pass was done, and they'd ram you. And so I'd say, well, if you watched their driving before you got there, you'd see that erraticness that I don't need to pass them in corners where there's like a high rate of speed, or I should pass them when the track is at a slow speed so that I can get by safely. Things like that. That will serve you in race cars because you'll run up against those people, right? Like especially in endurance racing or where you have multiple cars with multiple drivers and things are cycling through. It's a good skill to be able to go, that guy's not very safe right now. I'm not going to pass him like my best buddy that I know would hold his line. I'm going to wait half a lap and do it when we're coming really slow so I can just run by. That way we won't wreck cars. That sounds good.
Davin, those 2 points are, I mean, we could end the podcast right now and go, that's it. Like, like those 2 points of being adaptable. I mean, I see drivers all the time they're very, very quick when the car's right. Mm-hmm. But there are other drivers who can drive anything, anytime. And the more adaptable you are, the better you're going to be in everything, right? And then that whole thing of observing the car up ahead, the driver up ahead, and judging and everything. That is so much of racecraft, but it's the hardest thing. It's the hardest thing to teach, mm-hmm. And yet, it's one of those things that you learn through experience.
Yep.
You get hit by somebody, and you go, well, I don't want that to happen again. How do I avoid that? So,
yep, exactly. Well, and I think a little bit of it is a bit of subconscious ego. Like, I've caught this person, I've gotten by them. Clearly, they should respect the fact that I've gotten by and leave me alone. But that is not the way the world works ever. No. And so what you experience getting to that person is what you're going to experience when you pass that person. And so you have to kind of adapt to that. One of the lessons I got taught when I first started racing that has served with me for a long time is drive as if the other racers can't see you.
Yeah.
And so put yourselves in positions that when you make a pass, it doesn't matter whether they can see you or not. Like, yes, you're presenting your car. Yes, there's all of that. But the whole purpose behind it is like, if you know this guy is going to turn into you because he's not paying attention, don't just run alongside him just because you can. Right? Because that person will just turn into you and put you both in the wall. Like, put yourself in a spot where maybe they're early on the apex and you're late on the apex, so you go underneath them and you can just run straight because both cars are running straight. Right? And like you said, a lot of that comes with experience, and I'd rather learn that experience cheaply at an indoor kart track than expensively on a racetrack.
Yeah.
So,
So a driver that I'm coaching is racing in IMSA, and we were talking with another driver who races in IMSA and European Le Mans Series and World Endurance Championship stuff. And one of the things that is, not relatively, somewhat common is the crashes between the pro drivers and the gentleman drivers in endurance races. Mm-hmm. And his comment, Matt Bell, who's a great driver, one of the things that Matt said was, as a pro, it is your job not to be hit. Like, right. If you get hit by a lesser driver, it is your fault. Mm-hmm. And because you haven't factored that in. So it's exactly what and you're right. I mean, you can learn those things at an indoor go-kart track.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You definitely can, right? Yeah. And it helps because especially when you're racing against not just racers, but like not racers is the best way I can put that. Yeah. You get a lot of examples of just ridiculous stuff. And occasionally, like, it's worked to my advantage in my actual races where I'll have a tool in my toolkit of like, do you remember that one time that like 70-year-old lady came dive bombing down the inside of me in an indoor kart track? You know what? That's very similar to the situation I'm in right now. I'm just going to sit on the outside for a moment longer. Yep, they flew in front of me.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Right? Like, those skills have served me very, very well, just because I got a lot of experiences very, very quickly. And, and then as I started to get more experience and raced more and more people, I also appreciated really good driving because you'd see someone up close that would pull off some move and you're like, man, that was like real good precision. Like, not only did you give me the space, but you did it in a really tight spot or blah, 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 blah. So, I appreciated better driving better because I'd seen bad driving a lot. So.
So let's flip here a little bit. And you've been doing a fair bit of sim racing this year, correct?
I have
Like a lot of people.
like a lot of like a
Yeah.
lot. Mhm.
Well, how does I'm curious your experience in karting, how it applied to sim racing, and how sim racing is helping your karting, and I guess how much of the racecraft stuff we just talked about comes through in the sim racing that you've experienced this year.
Sure. So I think the first thing that probably broke my brain was that like I've done a lot of sim racing in the past and also like been a game tester for race car companies and like other things like that. So I've done a lot of digital driving just for that sort of stuff. But still, like when you haven't done it in a while, getting back in, your brain kind of forgets things. The one thing that kind of I had to remind myself was how to reprogram my brains to the inputs that I had and then use my subconscious for the other ones. Because like in a sim, you don't have kinesthesia. You don't have a lot of kinesthetic input. And so, based on what you hear and what you see and force feedback and a few other things, those are like the few kinesthetic inputs that you get to tell your brain what the car is doing. And so, retraining my mind to kind of interpret the inputs was a thing that it's taken me a little while to kind of get back up to speed with, right? So that I was comfortable and having fun and could, be creative with the way I was driving, right? And it's just been a good way to kind of get extra seat time where I could afford to, right? I've been playing like a lot of Assetto Corsa Competizione and a lot of R Factor 2, and I'm not a huge iRacing guy only because I like the payment structure of how that platform works is not my thing, but I appreciate the platform for what it does, right? But that's another viable option for a lot of people. And I did a lot of F1, the Codemasters F1 leagues, because for me, that was as close to a go-kart as I could get for the type of racing. It was very manic. There was lots of shifting. There was lots of battles. And that's very similar to being on the go-kart track. So I spent a lot of time in formula races because it was kind of similar to the, frequency rate, whatever you're trying to talk about with a go-kart race. So
So why have none of those companies done a lot of stuff with karting?
So karting is hard to do simulation on. There's one good sim that I've played called Kartcraft that is like been an open source platform that does a pretty good job, right? But karting is very difficult. Like understanding the like the jacking and kind of suspension setup and feel of a go-kart when you can't feel it is hard, right? Especially in a kart because you don't have suspension. So a lot of what you get back is feedback from the tires, flex in the chassis. It's a lot of jacking. There's a lot of kinesthesia that happens in a go kart. Because you're a bracing member in the kart, and so that's just been hard for folks to translate into a simulator correctly. Right, where a car is, relatively a big heavy box with springs and everything around it, right, compared to a go kart. And so relatively you have a lot more range of open adjustment in a way that you can make dynamic changes that I can make work in a sim than a go-kart. So it's been kind of hard. You either get, go-kart, like sim go-karts that just kind of feel like trays that don't really do anything, and then you don't get a really good experience. Or you get something like Kartcraft, which I'm sure if that company had the money to properly invest in developing a platform will be something really cool, but it takes a long, 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 long time. So,
Right.
you know.
When the sim racing you did this year, were you competing in some of the leagues? Were you competing? Have you done much of the AI racing versus the racing against Joe or Sally on the other side of the world right now?
Oh, yeah.
And I'm just kind of curious your experience between the two and how much you got out of each.
Yeah, I did both, and I still do. I was on my sim before you called me, so the timing was pretty apt. So I spent a lot of time on racing against the AI and just doing laps on digital tracks to just like learn about tracks and learn kind of generally like where the cars like to go. And it's a great time for me to learn a lot about myself, where there's not a lot of like it's easy to hit the reset button, right? We were talking about earlier about learning how to learn. And a lot of times when I'm in a sim, I spend a lot of time trying to figure out like, what is this car trying to do? What kind of feedback am I getting? Where is it going well? Where am I not going well? What changes do I need to make? And what things do I need to just deal with? Right. And then do laps and laps and laps and laps until I can feel comfortable. Because at the end of the day, like it's about feeling comfortable and being able to kind of hit the consistent lap time and hit the same laps over and over again. And some of that is reminding my brain to calm down and reminding my like body to calm down. Where like in a real car, you kind of have that like 5% of fear of like, I'm going to hurt myself, so I don't want to go completely ballsy, right? Where in a sim, you don't have that. So you overdrive everywhere. And so I'll spend time practicing against the AI or by myself, making sure I'm not overdriving, because it's a thing that people don't spend a lot of time practicing on, right? They just throw it off the road every 5 minutes. I was talking to my wife about it, and I say, like, when I'm in the sim, I pretend like it's a real car. And if somebody gave me their real car and I threw it off the road every 2 laps, they wouldn't let me drive the car anymore.
Yeah.
So I practice like it's a real car and work to stay consistent and make passes when they make sense and all those sorts of things. Even just when I'm practicing against the AI, because my subconscious brain doesn't really know the difference, and so it's good practice. At the end of the day, though, racing people is always the best thing to do, I feel, because there's the variability of just, you don't know what you're going to get, right? Every battle is different. Every race is different. I spent a lot of time racing on Assetto Corsa so I could race in production cars. And then I've spent time racing in the Formula One game just because I really enjoy it. And those have been fun because then you get a lot of racecraft practice. You battle against a lot of different people who drive different ways, some for the better, some for the worst. But at least it's always different, right? And so, you kind of learn here and there a little bit of both. But I still think racing against the AI is actually valuable practice just for your brain, right? Just to do laps of different tracks. Like I spent this morning racing around in the wet at Brands Hatch just because I realized I don't spend a lot of time racing on sims in the wet. And I was running around this morning and I was thinking to myself, man, I wish I had as much grip in the sim in the real life, like in real life in the wet. Because sims don't really have a good sense of wet driving yet. So you actually have a ton of grip in sims that you just don't have in cars.
Yeah.
So I was just having fun, just driving around. So
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge with wet. What is wet, right?
right.
What,
Yeah.
dry, the range of grip in the dry, the range is pretty small. It's a pretty small window.
Right.
The range of grip in the wet could be massive, from
Yes.
flooding to damp.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a difficult thing for, I guess, the sim makers to simulate. But
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm.
the challenge that I see with some of you bring up a really great point, is a lot of people get in a sim and they immediately try to drive as fast as they think they would have. Therefore they crash, and then they go, "Oh, this isn't realistic."
Mm-hmm.
And you go, "Well, if I'd given you that Indy car or that GT3 car or whatever, your first laps on a real track wouldn't have been that fast. You would have taken a little bit more time to build up speed, and you probably wouldn't have crashed. But because it's a sim, you kind of just jump in, and especially when somebody's doing it when somebody else is watching.
Yeah.
That's like you said, it's kind of keeping the ego in check, right?
It's hard, man. I mean, like, I stream races, and it's hard sometimes to not just want to go in and see how fast I can go so people can say, wow, that's fast. It's really hard. And I'll spend time just kind of taking a deep breath and saying, look, this race is 45 minutes long. I'm not going to win anything on the first lap. If I run it off the road, it's just going to be a pointless waste of time for everybody. So let's build into it. Like the 2-second gap that car has in front of me over the course of 45 minutes, it's next to nothing. And I will get that back down over the course of 45 minutes. I literally only need to find a tenth a lap for the next 20 minutes, and then I'll catch him. So we're fine.
You bring up the streaming. I've had a few people that have kind of in the past few months sent me links and to their races, their sim races. And so I've watched bits and pieces. It's actually really great, because we've got people that are, they're the color commentators, as if they're on TV. They're doing these e-races or these eSport sim races, and the coverage is fantastic. Like it's like, if you didn't look close, you'd probably go, "This is real." So it's pretty. I mean, it's amazing just how that whole thing is coming in. I've been approached for sponsorship. Please don't send me anymore if you listen to this. No, I don't mean that. But and you look at how these sim races are being promoted and everything. It's fantastic. It really is cool. Yeah.
I mean, there's probably only a few scenarios where I would say this is a good thing, but kind of during the first round of lockdown, right? Sim racing really exploded because we couldn't go out to racetracks, and for the 20 years leading up to that, you had sim racers saying, if only somebody would spend a little bit of time, giving this a little bit of love and attention, people would find it to be entertaining. But most people either were like, no, because I either want to look at real cars, or they'd never really had taken the time to really be that involved. And so, now everyone was kind of quote unquote forced to, and you saw the entertainment value. And, now esports is really starting to take off. I jokingly laugh about it because, like, before I got into race cars, I was, big into StarCraft and, Counter-Strike and kind of like playing a lot of first-person shooters online. And I mean, that community is huge. Like, side-scrolling fighting games and other kind of, digital platforms is massively entertaining.
Yeah.
But, motorsport and digital motorsport just never really figured it out. And so it just kind of sat over by itself. And then, this lockdown period, we had, several 24 hours of virtual Le Mans. We had, Indy 500s. We had a lot of iRacing championships. One local karting group from the NKA did a Stars of Karting sort of thing on iRacing, where like all the racers in the area jumped on iRacing and raced over the winter. And then they had a cash prize for when they got back to their go-karts. Like, there's a lot of that creativity that was really, really cool. Right. And, for me, it was fun because, like, you got a chance to meet and network with a whole big group of people that I probably wouldn't have had a chance to do otherwise because we were all at home.
Yeah.
So, and it also leveled the playing field a little bit because I had a little bit of knowledge of hardware and a few other things that other people didn't have, so I could participate. So that was nice.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, good commentary, good racing. Like, it's all about how much fun you're having, right? Because at the end of the day, it's supposed to be fun. And so if you can get into some good races and have a good community of folks and have some good commentary, it's just as much fun as being out at the real racetrack. It'll never replace it, but like, it's sort of like we were talking about at the very beginning, right? Like, I'm not trying to get go-karts to replace cars. I'm not trying to get sims to replace go-karts. I'm not trying to do any of that. It's just, what are the things I can do that are fun and how can I make them cross-apply where possible, right? And, it's probably 70% of all those things have some similarity, and then the 30% of the unique things are what make them unique. So,
good point. And again, ultimately, it comes back to what we've talked about a number of times here. It's learning how to learn. And so in the year of the pandemic, in terms of the learning how to learn, you've gone back to sim racing more. But the other thing that I've noticed is the Facebook page on books. Talk about that. Talk about that, and just, I guess, the reasoning behind it, or what. Why you do it.
Okay, so I can't take full credit for this because this was really Bill Caswell's idea, but I really
Crazy
loved
Bill.
it. Right? Yeah, but it was a great idea.
Yeah.
So we were talking online and we needed a space that, like, the year has been crazy and everyone's been stuck online, and I think we all know why we've been stuck online. So that gets stressful, and we wanted a space that we could talk about the things that we loved, and we wanted to be able to chat about just not political stuff, to be frank. And so Bill came to me and said, I have a bunch of books about motorsport that I never talked to anybody about. Do you think you know anybody else who might like books? And I was like, I sure do. Right. So we created a motorsport book club on Facebook where, we recommend books to folks. And, there's a small subset of that group who we get together and we read a select book and we talk about it. And it's a nice, relaxing way to de-stress after all the crazy that's been going on. And it also has opened my mind to new books and approaches on motorsport and driving and car development and other things that I just had never been exposed to. Old books that I didn't know existed that I went to go look up, new books that I knew that were going to be written soon that I now want to read now. Right. And so it's been a lot of fun because, like, in the space of learning how to learn, that's the best way, I think, for me to de-stress, is focus on something that I can teach myself to do better. So, and racing is always going to be something I need to learn how to do better. So we made a book club.
Well, it's interesting. I've often said, where else can you pay $20 for something? And sometimes it's $1.99 and sometimes it's $35 for a book, right? Mm-hmm. But where else can you spend $20 and learn something that may stick with you for the rest of your life, that will have a major impact on the way you perform behind the wheel of a car?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think the books that honestly have given me the biggest insight from the book club have actually less been about cars and more been about the mind.
Yeah.
Right. There's like Thinking Body, Dancing Mind that you recommended to me a number of years ago. I think it's amazing.
Yeah.
Right. There are a lot of psychology books that have been recommended in there. Right. And I think that has been really helpful because at the end of the day, when it comes to no matter what I'm racing, a large part of it is me in my own head trying to figure out what's going on. And, sometimes reading through these books, I start to contemplate about how my brain is interpreting, a new challenge, or why I'm frustrated, or my, addiction to competition, or how I'm managing competition, or how do I set a success goal for myself, even if it's not the ultimate goal that I'm looking for. Like, how do I become more process oriented, right? Which is a huge thing for me, right? Like, I try not to focus so much on outcomes as I do about process, and then the outcomes are a result of the process, rather than just being like, I have to win. Right. Because there's too many variables going on sometimes, where like I just can't make the whole weekend be just this one thing. Like, some days it is. Some days I show up and I'm like, I'm here to win this thing, and that's literally the reason I came. But there are other days where I'm like, you know what, I think I drove better than the guys in front of me, but I just finished fifth. Just something happened in the race, and it wasn't my fault. Was what happened. But I still need to give myself a pat on the back, right? I still did a good job. And, reading through a lot of the books that I've learned from the book club have opened my mind up to that way of thinking, rather than going home sad that I didn't get a trophy. It's more like, did I do the best I could? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And when no, like, why? Right? Is something that I, being more self-reflective and kind of being more introspective around how do I make it better the next time, rather than just being like, well, that sucked, and then not take anything from it. So.
Well, I'm probably going to jump on the Facebook book club thing, but
yes.
I need some advice from you.
Okay.
There are a couple books that people have recommended that when I read them, I didn't get anything out of them, but I don't want it to be, oh, yeah, Bentley's talking about it because all he wants to do is promote his books. So I kind of just go, no, I'm not getting involved with that. What do I do?
Well, so actually, I think that I got just as much feedback from folks who didn't get something out of a book as those who did, right? I think actually just being involved in the discussion is a good place to start, because you normally end up running against somebody else who will refer you to another book that might give you what you're looking for, right? There are some books that I think to be very, very interesting that other people find to be completely boring, right? I'm trying to think of off the top of my head. There's an example that I'm trying to think of a scenario I was part of, and I can't remember the book for the life of me right now, where it was recommended. I read it. I didn't initially agree with anything that person said, and then ironically, the author of the book was a friend of the person who recommended it, and he joined, and then I ended up talking to him about it briefly, and it kind of changed my mindset around this because I got some additional context, and I'm trying to remember the name of this book to save my life. And I know it's called Optimum Drive. That's what it's called.
Yeah,
it's called Optimum Drive. And when I first read it, it was kind of from the point of view of a pro race car driver who's kind of coaching other pro race car drivers. And because I am not a pro race car driver, I was like, and then as I talked more with other folks about the book, because I read it, I was like, I'm interested in reading it. I got nothing to do. I'm stuck in my house, right? I learned more around like how to adjust my thinking over some of the concepts so that I could get them to apply to me, rather than just like, this person's wrong, this book was stupid, right? And then I got recommended some other books that I then dove into afterwards. So, if you find that you want to be involved in discussion in some way, I just say, jump in. And even if it's just, I hate this book, I would rather people talk about it than not say anything.
Well, I don't think there's a book that I've ever read that I hate. But, for example, if a book comes along and says, you should get in the zone while you're driving. You should get in the zone while you're driving. Getting in the zone when you're driving is really important. Getting in the zone when you're driving is really great. But it doesn't tell me how to get in the zone. I go, could have wasted, or I could have used that time for reading something else.
But see, I think you gave some really good feedback even right there, where you're just like, you didn't tell me how to do it. Right.
Correct.
So I would say speak up and say that. I'd be like, this book really talks about this one concept, but it never told me how. Like, either A, is there another book that I could read that would teach me how to do that? Or like, does anyone have any suggestions on how to do that? And then we end up in a discussion of how to get into the zone while they drive. Yeah. Right. If you had come to me and said that, I probably would have pointed you to Clive Boland's book, Overdrive Formula One in the Zone.
Yeah.
Which is a fantastic book.
Yeah.
That spends a lot of time speaking about different racing drivers and how they get in the zone, and like their different ways of approaching it, because everybody has different things.
Yep.
Right. I'm a big mental triggering sort of person. I have several key triggering phrases that kind of help me get into the zone. And then the one thing that kind of helps me over the long term is I use my previous experience to guide future performance. So I'll get into a car sometimes and I'll get really nervous, like just like gut-wrenchingly nervous. And I'll sit here and I'll think to myself and I'll go, of the times that you've driven a race car, how many times have you driven it successfully versus how many times have you crashed it? And I'd be like, the number of times I've driven successfully has been more than the number of times I've crashed.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So then you know how to do this. Great. You've gone around and around and around and around and haven't randomly exploded. So that likelihood is not there. Okay, cool. Just go and do the thing you know how to do and then fix the rest. Oh, okay. Like my mechanic always says, just shut up and drive the go-kart. Right? And that is actually really true. Like I would overthink trying to make the lap perfect every single time. And the car is never going to be perfect. And the track is never going to be perfect. And the race is never going to be perfect. And so just stop worrying about that. Just go do the thing you do. And that then helps me just go into the zone because then I'm like, okay, I got this. Let's just go do the thing.
Drive, stupid.
Yeah, just drive. Exactly. Which, look, I overthink everything. I remember the first time I read that from your book, I got angry. Because I was just like, but like, there's a lot going on and I'm driving the car and I need to think. And like, what do you mean you don't want me to think? Like, I don't get it. And then I'd start to think about it. And then over time, I kind of, internalized it more and realized it like it's, it's like walking. You don't think about walking, right? It's a subconscious behavior. You just do automatically. Mm-hmm. So just go do that. And so it's the same thing in the car is that, a lot of what you do in the car, you just do automatically and just use your instincts to adjust where you feel like things are safe. And then, also like you can always slow down. So, if I'm ever in a car in a go-kart or whatnot, and I don't feel safe at the speed I'm going, I just slow down. And then I'll, either work with my engineer or I'll work with data or I'll work with a mechanic or I'll work with a teammate and either say, I need to figure out a way to change my approach in this corner or in this place because I don't feel comfortable going as fast as the other guy. Or is that even necessary? Like this guy's killing me in this corner. Does it even matter? Because I might be destroying him somewhere else. And so I can just kind of let that go and just focus on the area that I'm demonstrably faster at. Right. But, working your way through the process has been a big thing for me. And so, if you don't feel like you're getting something out of it, I'd almost say speak up and then see where you can get something out of it.
Well, and it's, I've had many drivers come to me and say, I read your book, last year or 10 years ago, whatever. I didn't get a lot out of it. But recently I've been where my driving is. I actually went back to it and now it's all clicking. So sometimes that is the case with a book is it may not trigger something with you or, connect with you right now, but it will at some point. So, there are some books that I'm going to go back to and read again, but I'll jump on and join you guys in that. I probably will be sharing. There's all the driving books on my bookshelf and all the engineering books and all that other stuff. But I'm like you. I love some of the other books that you read, and it could be a business book. It could be a book about somebody's adventure or something like that, and you're reading that and you're going, oh, that connects with the hairpin at so and so. Yeah.
To that point. I don't know if you've read the book Total Competition.
Yes.
Yeah. So Total Competition is a great example of that, right? It's the Ross Braun, Adam Parr book, where it's actually more about like strategic thinking and business relationships than it is about like driving and motorsport, but it's all within the realm of running a Formula One team. And like I've used that book not only to like help my own driving of like how I work with people at racetracks, but also in my professional career of like how I build teams and how I get people to function and get the most out of people. And like, there's a really good example of a book where, if I was just talking cars with my car friends, they'd probably be like, I don't understand why you want me to read this book. And I'm like, just trust me that this book has value and please read it.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I totally get you. I mean, life is very multifaceted and there's so many things that apply in so many different other ways. My wife is always telling me to sometimes watch documentaries on things that aren't race cars because sometimes I'll get inspiration for race cars.
Are there documentaries that are not about race cars?
I don't know. I keep looking for them, but I keep finding only the race car ones. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Right?
Sorry.
But no, seriously. But I was watching one about Japanese wood carving and like the methodology around how they carve wood. And that made me think about like the discipline of how you approach getting into a race car. Like there were a lot of those like transferable skills of like, here's someone else in a completely different discipline than my discipline that I could take some ethos of how they function and apply it to my chosen thing.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And so, in cases where that can apply, I'm always interested to learn about that sort of stuff because you never know how your brain's going to click into things.
Yeah.
Right. So.
And I think sometimes we need to ask ourselves, how does this apply to what I do?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How does this apply to what I do? Right.
Yeah.
Same thing you were brought up earlier with like Sims or go-karts or whatnot, right? Like, my domain of motorsport experience is mostly grassroots, right? Club racer, autocrosser, sim racer, go-karter. And so frequently I ask myself when I'm doing my thing, how does this apply to what I do? Right.
Yeah.
And then even when I'm watching professional racing, I'll still ask, like, are there elements of what they're doing that I could implement in my own driving or vice versa? Right. Because you'll see certain techniques and things that drivers will do. And sometimes you're like, I could do something similar to that. And then other cases, I'm like, why are they doing that?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, everything applies here and there a little bit.
Yeah. So, Davin, to wrap this up, could I ask you for your speed secret? I've asked you this before, but it is that, it's that one piece of advice that you would give drivers listening to the show to help them perform better. What would you say? And maybe I'm putting you on the spot here, but
No. I would say be open. Be willing to absorb and listen from different people and try new things and be receptive to different feedback from different people. That doesn't mean that you implement everything, but if someone is, willing to give you their time to share some feedback about something you're doing, good or bad, listen to them and see what applies, put some away for later and throw the rest out. That would probably be mine.
Darn. So I just finished writing an article that was very similar to what you just said, but you just said it in much fewer words, more succinctly, and way better than I did. But, the one thing that you bring up at the end of that is so important. I mean, be open and collect information from as many different sources as possible. But at some point, you also have to be a filter, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's knowing what to filter out and what not to filter out.
Yeah, there's some times where people give me feedback and I'm like, I'm just not going to do that. Or like that doesn't apply to me, or like we're using the same word in different ways. And so I need to take the concept of what they're saying and apply it to my own driving. I don't need to apply it one for one, right? Sometimes it is just like do this thing better. But in other cases, it's like do this element of this thing better in your own unique way. Because there's just some things about your driving style and personality and way that you interact with the car that if I tried to make you drive like Fernando Alonso, it's just not going to work, right? So I need to find the Ross way, right, and get you comfortable to do your way and then maximize that, right?
How do you know, you say be open, but also know when to say, no, I'm not going to do it. How do you know the difference between those two? How do you know when to accept something and when not to? Because if it's strictly, I accept everything that is already in my belief system, what I believe is right, are we really stretching?
I don't always know, right? I think what I try to do is I just try to pick one thing and apply it, and then pick everything. And so that's what I mean mostly by like putting other things aside or throwing it out. Like sometimes people will come to me and it makes me cry, but they'll come to me and you're doing this wrong, you do this better and this and this and this and that. And I'm like, okay, you just gave me 10 things. And there's just no way I can apply all 10 things elegantly together and solve these problems that clearly I have, or you think I have, either way. So I'm just going to focus on one. And I think the easiest one I can get my mind around is corner entry. Or the thing I'm going to get my mind around is running up next to the guy and staying on the throttle all the way to the end. Or whatever that one thing is. And that's all I'm going to focus on today. Or it's going to be turn 6, and that's all we're doing today, okay? And then when I feel like I have a good handle on that, I'll go back to my list of other things you say I'm terrible at, and I'll apply the next thing, right? But I can't just absorb them all and apply them all because then it would be too overwhelming for me. I won't know what success looks like. And so I'll just panic and everything will go backwards. So,
Well, that is awesome advice, Davin. I really appreciate you taking the time. How do people follow you, know more about what you're doing, or learn, get involved with some of the things that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter under Relaxed Driver. It's just the two words together, so it's 2 Ds. And you can find me on Facebook. I'm probably the only Davin Sturdivant with a go-kart in his photo on Facebook, but I think it's also Relaxed Driver there too. But I try to make it pretty easy. And I'm pretty open to talking to everybody. So just, ping me and say, hey, I heard your thing, and I want to talk to you about a thing, and we'll talk about a thing.
And if a listener here wants to join in your book club?
Oh, okay. It's actually just called the Motorsport Book Club. It's just called Motorsport Book Club on Facebook. And if you can't find it, then just use the other things I mentioned earlier and say, I want to join the Motorsport Book Club, and I'll send you a link to it.
Cool. Awesome. Hey, Davin, thanks again. One of these days we'll get back together when we can, without being totally socially distanced. I hope that is very, very soon. We'll go grab a coffee and hot chocolate at a Starbucks one of these days nearby.
I'm so looking forward to that. That sounds great.
Yeah. In the meantime, keep learning, having fun.
Yeah, take care.
Do you want to really understand your favorite track? Or get a preview of a new track for your first visit? Well, then you need a track map. And Ross has one. And it's free. A good track map is one of the most effective ways to improve your driving. It helps you learn the subtleties of the circuit, as well as helping you keep tabs on how well you're doing at that particular track. Sure, you can Google any track in the world to find a general map of the layout, but if you want an accurate map, one specifically designed to allow you to make notes on it, then you need to go to speedsecrets.com/trackmaps. You can download a map of your favorite track. There are currently 100 of them for the United States, Canada, Europe, the UK, and Australia. And remember, they're all free. Just go to speedsecrets.com/trackmaps. Download your map and get ready for more learning and more fun.